Hi, everybody. My name's Lauren Cusick. This training is going to go over lockout tagout awareness for employees of Hollingsworth Logistics. This particular training will be geared towards authorized employees as well, affected employees too, in that case. So just a little bit of background on me. I work as a safety and health consultant for the insurance agency who Hollingsworth works with. So this training, like I mentioned, we're going to aim at authorized employees, affected employees, the people who are going to be working around machinery that may be serviced or repaired, and we might have some hazards that go along with that. So not every employee is going to come across this. So this is really geared towards those employees who work in those situations on maybe a monthly basis or weekly basis or what have you. So during this training, we want to discuss how to recognize hazardous energy sources, identify types and magnitude of the energy available in the workplace, understand, implement methods and means necessary for energy isolation control. Now, some learning objectives. Many jobs require the use of machinery, and as we know, machinery sometimes needs maintenance as part of like a regular routine, or maybe it needs some emergency repairs in case of a breakdown. But before any work can be done on equipment, you need to be certain the operation cannot suddenly release energy that will make it, start up unexpectedly while a person's working in that point of operation. So it's really important that all Hollingsworth employees have some insight about lockout and tagout, especially the authorized employees. So the purpose of this course is for you guys, the attendees, to learn about lockout tagout programs and practices that are commonly used, as well as some terminology that's commonly used. We're going to go over lockout tagout procedures that are required, what sources of hazardous energy are, and some critical components of a lockout tagout program, as well as many other things as well, but just some topics we're going to point out. I have a video for you guys. If you want to watch this, just a quick 2-minute video.
This is the Bacardi bottling plant in Jacksonville, Florida. It's August 16th, 2012 at 4:30 p.m. What you're seeing here is a palletizer, a machine that packs and stacks cases of rum onto a pallet. The man you see here operates the palletizer. He's been cleaning the machine because bottles often break in the cases and the rum leaks on the conveyor belt, making it sticky. When this happens, the cases then crash into each other and bottles fall to the ground. This has been happening for a couple of years at Bacardi, and it hasn't been fixed. As the operator walks away, cases start coming down the line very quickly and crashing into each other. He hits the emergency stop button. Now, what's supposed to happen next is operators need to put a lock on the machine to prevent somebody from pushing the start button while someone else is inside. On the machine, there's a lot of shattered glass as seen in these photos. There's also another emergency stop button and some bars that you can put underneath the platform to keep it from falling. But employees rarely did this for fear of slowing down production. The man in the orange vest is Dave Davis. He's a temp worker on his first day on any job in his entire life. In fact, his shift started just an hour and a half ago when he sent this photo to his fiancée. The operator points down below and tells Davis to sweep up the glass under the machine. Look at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. You'll see Davis go underneath the palletizer to sweep up the glass. A few minutes later, Davis goes back upstairs to ask a question. The man in the white shirt, who's a supervisor, told police he had told Davis to sit by the side, but others heard him tell Davis to simply go get some gloves. Davis goes back downstairs underneath the machine. The supervisor and operator finish cleaning the conveyor rollers above Davis. They close the gate and turn on the machine. Cases come down the line, they're pushed into a square, and the platform goes down. Then they hear a yell. They see that Davis has been crushed by the machine. They hit the stop button. The palletizer operator is trying to manually raise the platform off Davis, but it's not working. The supervisor radios for someone to call 911. Here you'll see a worker pass down a pry bar to see if they can lift up the platform. There were some 60 cases weighing about 2,000 pounds on the platform when it went down. First responders got there within minutes, but it was already too late. The weight of the machine had killed Davis.
All right, so I'm really hoping you guys could hear that, but you never know with some technology issues that come up. But in short, the first 90 minutes of Dave Davis's job, he was called over to help at a palletizer at the Bacardi bottling plant in Florida. And after, some miscommunication, he was found underneath the palletizer when it started up again, and he ended up getting crushed and died on the first day of his job. They actually noted that it was his first day on any job in his life, just to make it that much more sad. So I like to include this video because it shows how, anything can happen at any time, but we can also learn from these mistakes and try to be better. I would like to think that, this plant will never have a lockout tagout incident again, possibly, because they know just how devastating it can be. From incidents like this, we can learn what we should do. We can learn what we can do better. And here in this example, communication was really entirely lacking. Not to mention training, which we're really not exactly sure if this man even had any training about the control of hazardous energy. So that's one thing. And thankfully, there are OSHA standards and requirements in place that require lockout, tagout training, inspections, procedures for all machines that we use. And that does save a lot of lives on a daily basis, but it doesn't save every life, unfortunately. In 2019, actually, control of hazardous energy for general industry was still the fourth most heavily cited violation from OSHA. So that's a pretty scary statistic. Because of the severity of injuries that occur from a lockout tagout incident. It's not just a little pinch or a cut, it's going to be a severe injury. So another staggering fact is that according to OSHA, proper lockout tagout procedures prevent an estimated 120 fatalities and 50,000 injuries each year. I wanted to give a little bit of background on OSHA. I'm sure you guys have all heard of it, but so the founding basis for these standards goes back to the initiation of OSHA. And I know everyone's heard of OSHA by now, but a little bit of background on how it came to be. OSHA, it was formed back in 1971, and the main function of it was to create better working environments within the United States, basically in an effort to ensure that safety and health of all the workers in the US was upheld. So OSHA standards, they deal with all different types of things, but this OSHA standard 29 CFR 1910.147, this is specific to lockout tagout. So that lockout tagout standard was put in place as a result of research, which showed that between 1982 and 1997, 152 workers had lost their lives due to accidental startup. So despite an increase in worker awareness since OSHA was founded, there are still a high number of accidents that still occur when equipment is accidentally turned on during maintenance procedures. And this is what we're really going to try to prevent by doing this training. I just wanted to put this slide up here. This is basically a general statement of the reference standard 1910.147 for lockout tagout. So the standard covers the servicing and maintenance of machines and equipment in which the unexpected energization or startup of the machines or equipment or release of stored energy could harm employees. The standard establishes minimum performance requirements for the control of hazardous energy. So we're going to kind of go into what aspects of the standard need to be in place, what makes a lockout tagout program OSHA compliant, what would cause violations, and what kind of training you guys should have under your belt if you're going to be working with lockout tagout. So one thing I wanted to note were the exposures. So machine-related injuries or fatalities can occur during maintenance and servicing tasks when workers are exposed to an uncontrolled release of energy. So without the proper precautions, procedures in place, PPE, and training, an injury, it's almost guaranteed to occur in terms of the release of hazardous energy. And unfortunately, like I mentioned before, when it comes to lockout tagout and working with uncontrolled energy, the injuries, they're not going to be small ones like cuts or scrapes or, a trip and fall. It's going to be bone fractures, crushing injuries, amputations we see a lot of, even like, little tiny parts of your fingers or something along those lines. And also death be the end result of not working a lockout tagout job properly. So just as we saw in that video, it's similar to that. These injuries and death can be prevented. And we're going to go into ways to safely work in this kind of space. Okay, so there's different types of service and maintenance activities that require lockout tagout, or in which you would be using lockout tagout. So servicing and maintenance activities include cleaning, lubrication, clearing certain jams, making adjustments when maybe persons may be exposed to the unexpected. So we're going to go into this a little bit later, but only trained and authorized employees may place or remove a lock or a tagout device on equipment. So I wanted to give kind of like a real world example of when a lock would need to be used and procedures must be followed. So first we wanted to note that lockout tagout is a technique. It's used in all industries across the board, whether it be, a printing shop, a machine shop, welding machines, stamping plants, anything you could think of. It doesn't really discriminate based on industry. You're going to see it at some point. So for instance, in a printing shop, you may need to use lockout when a printing press becomes jammed or something like that. Some kind of maintenance needs to be put in place. So when there is a jam, that means typically an employee has to bypass the machine guards in order to reach that area of the jam, or really the point of operation where the jam occurred, and they need to clear it. So there is a need to unjam the machine, but that really doesn't mean that just because this occurred during your normal shift in the middle of your normal production hours, that you are the employee that needs to go right in there and unjam those parts and clear it. This is the kind of activity that falls under the lockout tagout standard because it involves servicing that could lead to employee exposure to unexpected activation of energy. So this is when the authorized employees come in and they are the ones who are required to do this kind of task because they have the correct training, right? So the same kind of thing, it happens in machine shops. If it becomes necessary to perform maybe an adjustment, which requires employees to bypass a guard or really to put his or her body in the point of operation, where the work is going to be performed on the material, or where like the danger zone exists during those machine operating cycles, the lockout tagout standard also applies. Just a couple examples of areas or activities when you'll be coming in contact with this. So reasons for employees not switching off equipment. We want to add this in here. So there are reasons in which you will not need to lock out electrical equipment, and that mostly includes cord and plug electrical equipment. So you guys do this all the time, I'm sure, but when working on a cord and plug electrical equipment, hazards can be minimized by just simply unplugging the equipment and ensuring the plug remains with the responsible worker. So by keeping your really like your exclusive control of that device's plug, workers can reduce the risk of exposure to the dangers of the unexpected startup. For example, a maintenance employee who has who's working with a power tool in the workshop has unplugged the device, and then the plug is also visible in his line of sight. He has not followed the lockout tagout procedures because, or he has followed the lockout tagout procedures because the plug's in his line of vision. He knows it is unplugged. He's working in the area, and no one else is working with him. In other words, OSHA likes to call this sole authoritative control. He's got the sole authoritative control over the plug. No need to follow lockout tagout procedures. First off, I thought we should go over some definitions just to kind of start it off. So first, lockout. In order to ensure that the energy is controlled, a lockout device is needed. So a lockout is placing a device on an energy isolating device in accordance with the established procedure that we're going to talk about later, those procedures, ensuring that the energy isolating device is locked out. Tagout is as a tagout is the placement of a tagout device on an energy isolating source. So in accordance with an established procedure to indicate that the energy isolating device and the equipment being controlled may not be operated until the tagout device is removed. But so you can kind of get it within that tagout definition, but a tagout device is the device that's used to indicate and warn potential users that the tagged equipment should not be operated. An energy isolating device prevents the transmission and the discharge of energy. So for example, a manually operated electrical circuit breaker, a disconnect switch, or a manually operated switchboard are examples of that. Energy sources, you can see they include electrical, mechanical, hydraulic, pneumatic, chemical, thermal, as well as some lesser known common energy sources would be included there. And then one big topic we really want to nail down during this training is the difference between affected and authorized employees. So affected employee is an employee whose job requires him or her to operate or use machinery or equipment on which servicing or maintenance is being performed under lockout or tagout circumstances. While an authorized employee is a person who's actually physically locking or tagging out the machines in order to do those maintenance or perform servicing requirements on the equipment. The two terms can kind of get a little confusing at first, but if you can think, authorized people are the employees who are just that. They are simply authorized to do the work, to do the lockout and tagout. While affected employees, they're working in the vicinity of where the authorized employees are working, and therefore they're affected by the work being done, and they need to be trained accordingly. I wanted to go over some energy sources as well. So more than one energy source can be utilized on equipment, and the proper procedures must be followed in order to identify energy sources and then lock them out, tag them out accordingly. So I wanted to go over really the four main energy sources that we see mostly. So we want to go over electrical, mechanical, mechanical, hydraulic, and pneumatic are the four I wanted to touch on. So electrical energy is the energy that comes from potential or kinetic energy. An example of an electrical energy, really simply put, is power from a plug outlet. This type of energy source needs to have the power shut off at the machine and disconnected as well. And mechanical energy is the energy of an object due to the motion or position. So examples include gravity, activation, energy, or energy stored in springs. Hydraulic energy pertains to the power related to pressurized fluid used to accomplish machine motion. So a good portion of industrial equipment will have at least one hydraulic energy source, which would need to be locked out, of course. And lastly, pneumatic energy refers to power related to pressurized air. So the pressure can be static or in motion, and the majority of industrial machinery will utilize pneumatic energy for the most part, and it will have at least one source of pneumatic energy that would need to be locked out. All right, so this we want to talk about as a part of the OSHA Standard 29 CFR standard. There must be a lockout tagout program in place to ensure that Hollingsworth is able to safely control and isolate the energy sources of any machines that you guys may be working with. The purpose of the program is to make sure that before an employee was to service equipment where the potential may exist for some unexpected energization or startup of the equipment, make sure the machine or equipment is isolated from the energy source and cannot be operated further. So I worked with Reed and the safety team to really help implement Hollingsworth lockout and tagout program. And as part of the standard, a written program does need to be in place to be in accordance with OSHA. And that 29 CFR 1910-147 standard, the control of hazardous energy, is where you'll be able to find every standard related to lockout, tagout, and more specifically, the lockout tagout program and the requirements that make it compliant with OSHA. The standard specifically covers servicing and maintenance of machines and equipment when an unexpected energization or startup could potentially cause an injury to employees. That's why you guys should be very familiar with the standard, just so you are able to work with it, work in this space as safely as possible. And one thing I wanted you guys to know is that there are 3 major components of a lockout tagout program. And that includes energy control procedures, which we're going to go over, employee training, the training that you guys are receiving on a regular basis, as well as periodic inspections, all of which we're going to go into more detail throughout the rest of the training. Okay, so what is lockouts? What the whole presentation is really about, but the goal of a machine lockout is to prevent the accidental energization or startup of equipment. There are certain predefined circumstances when lockout is 100% necessary according to OSHA, and other instances where it is not. We kind of went into that a couple slides back. So lockout is required in production operations only if an employee will be bypassing a guard to complete a job, or employees must place his or her body in the point of operation within the machine, within the danger zone. Lockout does not apply when there's a cord and plug connected to the equipment, which is under the exclusive control of the employee performing the maintenance, as we went over, a couple slides back. So under OSHA, this was referred to as the sole control of equipment, sole authoritative control of equipment. If you have this sole authoritative control of the equipment, you do not need to have a lockout or tagout device. Now, do I have to use my own locks and tags? Yes, this is very, very, very critical. Each person who's working on the equipment must place their own locks and tags to ensure their safety. And who can remove locks and tags? Only the employee who placed the lock and the tag can then remove it. So if the authorized employee is not available to remove a lockout or a tagout device, the employer may direct someone else to remove the device on the condition that they, that they follow a specific procedure that has been developed and all the employees are aware of it. The procedure must be documented, and training should be provided to go over this so that the person directed to remove the device is knowledgeable on all accounts. In the procedure to do this, it must include steps to verify that the authorized employee is not at the facility anymore, to ensure that all reasonable efforts are made to contact the authorized employee to inform them of the removal, and then to ensure the authorized employee has this knowledge before returning to work. Now, there's certain criteria that needs to be in place for the locks to actually be ready to use. So for the lockout locks to be OSHA compliant, they must warn against specific hazards, threats, and be clearly identifiable. So they have to all be the same. They all have to basically look identical because you don't want employees to be getting confused. They also must be strong enough to resist removal by reasonable force and have a standard shape and color, like I said. As we mentioned, only authorized employees should be issued locks, which should also then just come with the one key. Lockout locks, they have a distinct look and they can only be used for lockout procedures. This really ensures that the locks are consistent and affected employees and other authorized employees can easily recognize what's actually going on at that operation. And then tags should be used with the lock, and this kind of acts as a warning of hazardous energy, and it's really like an extra precaution in place. So like I mentioned in the definition section, tagout is the placement of a warning device on the power source. So the tag acts as that secondary warning not to restore energy, and it should be placed on the energy isolating device. What we really want you to know is that tagout procedures they're not as effective as lockout procedures in any way, because the tags, they're not providing any type of physical restraint on the equipment. That's provided by a lock. So when you see a tag attached to an energy isolating device, it is not to be removed without the authorization, the knowledge by the authorized employee who is responsible for it, right? So it's never to be removed or ignored. You may think, you know, wow, this tag's been on here for a while now. There's no way that they're actually still working on this machine. And then maybe you start up the machine and the next thing you know, someone's getting injured. But your next step, once you see that, or if you maybe you think something's up, that tag's been on there for a couple of days, your next step is to get in touch with the authorized employee whose tag it is. And that's kind of one characteristic of the tag as well, is that it needs to have the person's name on it, who was the authorized employee who put the tag on. So in the situation in which the lockout device cannot be attached to the energy isolating device, you need to use the tag option instead. So one thing that we want to nail down is that a tag out device should be treated the exact same way as a lockout device. Employees should become familiar with what the Hollingsworth tags actually look like. They may look similar to just like another warning sign that you may see across the facility, but they really need to be unique to lockout and tag out. The tag also needs to be kept as close to the machine as possible when attached, and the machine should not be tampered with in any way. And once again, a tag does not have any restraint on the equipment like a lock does. So it's very important to be aware of your surroundings, notice the tags, because that's their main job, is to act as that warning device. You got to make sure you keep your eyes peeled and you're seeing what's around you. And do not go any further with working with the machine if you do notice a tag. Tags are not resistant to different environmental conditions, and they should be waterproof if they're outside. If they are going to come in contact with maybe some high concentrations of dust or grease, new tags may be needed to be applied more regularly, maybe once a month or so. But in some facilities, that may not be an issue whatsoever. This is because the tags need to essentially be legible to everyone they come in contact with. So all employees need to be able to read and understand the wording on the tag, whether that be legible because of the dust concentrations or maybe because the tag's getting dirty, but also there cannot be any language barrier that employees are not able to read the tag. So this means that if there is more than one language present in your workplace, we really want the tags to address every language that's present in the building. So there's no injuries on that account. Okay, I've got another video for you guys. I think it's a pretty short one as well. This one's going to go over, we're going to get into effective versus authorized employees. So we'll give this a watch.
An authorized person is a person who locks out or tags out machines or equipment in order to perform servicing or maintenance. Authorized employees are the only ones who can apply and remove lockout-tagout devices. Lockout-tagout procedures must be completed by the authorized employee who will be performing the servicing or maintenance. Authorized employees must be trained on recognition of applicable hazardous energy sources, the type and magnitude of the energy available in the workplace, the methods and means necessary for energy isolation and control. Affected employees are employees whose job requires them to operate or use a machine or equipment on which servicing or maintenance is being performed under lockout or tagout. If they work in an area where servicing or maintenance is being performed, they are also considered an affected employee. Affected employees may not apply or remove lockout-tagout devices. They may not help or perform service or maintenance on locked-out devices. If they need to assist with the work, they become authorized employees and must be trained as such. Affected employees must be trained on the purpose and use of the energy control procedure.
Other employees work in areas where lockout tagout occurs but do not work on or near the equipment. Other employees must be informed of lockout tagout procedures and must know not to attempt to start any locked or tagged out equipment.
Great. So I really just wanted to give you guys a video just to kind of mix up my, from just hearing my voice this whole hour. So that went over authorized versus affected. We also want to note contractors and how they work with lockout tagout as well. So in review, authorized employees. That's a person who locks out or tags out machines or equipment in order to perform their servicing or maintenance on the machine. This employee has gone through the necessary training to control the energy sources of machinery. They're responsible for the placement of the lockout tagout devices. They're knowledgeable about the fact that they're the only ones who can then remove the lockout or tagout device. And they are knowledgeable about the lockout tagout program in place. Affected employees are an employee whose job requires him or her to operate or use a machine or equipment on which servicing or maintenance may be being performed under lockout and tagout conditions at some point during the day or some point during their job. These types of employees are responsible for working in areas where service or maintenance may be performed, like I noted. And then we're going to go over their training on the next slide and what kind of training they are to receive. And then lastly, I wanted to note contractor. So a contractor is a non-company employee or personnel who are likely to be in the area where the work is being performed. And they are, they're non-company workers, but should have been, previously trained maybe at their company, and maybe they have to go through Hollingsworth lockout tagout training and be familiar with those lockout tagout procedures. They should be familiar with Hollingsworth company lockout tagout policy, the energy control procedures of the machine that they're working around or within. And hopefully, maybe those contractors have a good working relationship with the authorized personnel who they work with when they're in the building. A good relationship is always helpful, but those are the three main types of employees that need to have some kind of lockout and tagout training. And now this is exactly what training should cover for each type of employee. So training, obviously, it's a critical part of, ensuring that hazardous energy, that your control plan, that Hollingsworth control plan is OSHA compliant. They must be receiving training, or all employees must be receiving some type of training. So according to OSHA, the employer must provide training to ensure the purpose and function of the energy control program, and that it is understood by all employees, and that the knowledge and skills required for the safe application, usage, and removal of the energy controls is understood. There are three different groups of people. We're going to go over the authorized, the affected, and just general awareness training that all employees should be receiving. So to comply with the training requirements, the safety team or maybe the safety manager, they must ensure that the training occurs before work starts. It provides training to all workers at regular intervals, and then document the training names and the dates of when they were trained. And as you can see, we're going to go over the three different types of employees and what they should receive and what kind of training they should receive. So first, we'll go over awareness. So awareness training, that's essentially, maybe all employees are given awareness training, right? Whether they're authorized or affected. These are the employees who maybe they aren't working in the vicinity of the machine, and they're definitely not performing maintenance on the machines, but they really should be aware of what lockout tagout is. Maybe they're office employees and they might be on the plant floor at certain times, and they should know what to expect when they're on the floor, right? So that type of training should include, you want employees to be knowledgeable about the purpose and the use of the energy control procedure. They want to be able to identify what tacks look like and what caution signs look like when lockout is being performed, and also the prohibition against trying to start equipment that has been locked out or tagged down. And then we have affected employees. Those employees are going to be It's necessary for them to learn about the purpose and the use of the energy control procedure, knowledgeable about the different types of energy sources they'll encounter, identification of the tags and caution signs again, and limitations of the tag out systems. And lastly, the authorized employees, they need to go over everything that awareness and affected employees go over, the use of locks, tags, placards, lockout, tag out, the actual procedures that we're going to go over in a little bit, any special procedures that come into play. And they also need to demonstrate that they have proficiency in locking out and tagging out a certain piece of equipment or any equipment that they're going to be working with on a regular basis or they're going to be assigned to. So is training required annually? The real answer is no. So training requirements, they're triggered at different parts of the job. So there's actual no OSHA standard for whether training needs to occur monthly, annually, biannually. It's really important to note that the lockout tagout training may need to take place multiple times per year, possibly, depending on who your employees are, you know, what they're doing, if you got new machinery that came in, new operations that are being used at the facility, and, you know, maybe if there's any accidents or injuries that have occurred recently, that's going to dictate how many times training occurred a year, say. So there is a standard that says that the training is required when these certain circumstances come into play. So on periodic inspections, when those periodic inspections reveal that training was an issue, when there's a new piece of equipment or new procedures that were introduced, when there's a change in a job assignment. So maybe you've been working on one lockout tagout procedure your whole maybe 3 years here. You're trained on it, you're knowledgeable about it, no changes have occurred to that. But then you switch jobs, you're working with a new piece of equipment. They can't just say that, oh, he's been locking out and tagging out this previous device for 3 years now and just move on to this next piece of equipment and get no training on it. We need to require training at those points. And also if accident or incident investigations revealed that lockout tagout training was deficient possibly. All right, one thing I wanted to go over was shift changes. So shift changes may be something that comes up maybe from time to time, probably not too often, but maybe it might be taking a while to maintenance or clean a machine and your shift is over and maybe you're not looking for any, you know, overtime and you're ready to head home. Well, in this case, you need to change your personal lockout devices directly. So it's a good idea to have this written in the procedures as well, but you really want to meet with the supervisor on your line or the part of your floor, and then that supervisor will then tell you to take off your lock. The supervisor will then replace your lock with his own lock until the next employee comes in to finish up the work. And then that employee will have his or her lock affixed. So never walk out of the building with your lock still affixed, especially because we know each lock is only supposed to have one key to keep everyone really liable for themselves. So once you are gone, you know, no one else can take that lock off. It's quite the hassle. They might have to call you, might have to come back in, you know. So we really don't want to do that, and it may hold up the work. So something to note. All right, so one thing I want to go over is group lockout. There may be times when multiple people are going to be servicing or performing maintenance on a machine together. So this is completely allowed, but there are just certain things that differentiate it from, you know, a single person lockout, which is what we've been talking about this entire time. It's just a single person lockout. So when more than one person involved, it's called a group lockout, obviously. It takes some additional safe planning because there's more people involved, right? There is going to be a primary authorized employee who will be put in place. Maybe you already know you're that primary authorized employee on your line or something like that, but that person is the one who will take the majority of the work or the responsibility on themselves, right? So each employee who's then working alongside of the primary authorized employee will place their personal lockout tagout device on the group lockout tagout mechanism before any work is going to start. And once you're done, you can then remove your personal lock, and then you can move on. So I wanted to note that the standard that you'll find group lockout tagout is 1910-147-2, and then Roman numeral 2 as well. And it goes over, so basically when servicing and or maintenance is performed by the crew, craft, department, or other group, they shall utilize a procedure which affords the employees a level of protection equivalent to that provided by the implementation of a personal lockout or tagout device. So this standard is just saying that people who are doing group lockout tagouts, they're entitled to the same amount of safety as a person doing just a single lockout tagout is required to have. Okay, so I think I mentioned one part of the lockout tagout program requirements is that it needs to go over energy control procedures. So according to OSHA, a written procedure should be developed, documented, and utilized for the control of potentially hazardous energy. Energy control procedures, they're put in place essentially so that employees can follow the steps for shutting down, isolating, locking, and securing machines or equipment to control hazardous energy. So employers, it's their duty to develop and document and use these specific procedures to control potentially hazardous energy when employees may be servicing equipment or machinery. This picture is just one example of a lockout tagout procedure template that MMA uses. So you can see it's got the purpose, the scope, the types and the magnitudes of energy sources presented, and then it also leaves some blank spots to put some pictures here. So procedures shall be developed, documented, and used for the control of hazardous energy when employees are engaging in the activities covered by this section. But there is an exception, and that is that the employer does not need to document the required procedures for a particular machine or equipment when all of the following exist on this slide. So there's 8 numbers, and it looks like, so if the procedure has no potential for stored or residual energy, if there's a single energy source which can be readily identified and isolated, isolation and locking out of that energy source will be completely de-energized and deactivate the machine and equipment. Machine or equipment is isolated from the energy source and locked out during servicing. Single lockout device will be attached and locked out condition. Lockout device is under the exclusive control of the authorized employee, servicing or maintenance. And servicing or maintenance does not create hazards for other employees. The employer, in utilizing this exception, has no accidents involving the unexpected activation of the machine. And this picture is one example of a lockout tagout procedure that was implemented at another one of my clients. So you can see the picture shows in one of these energy control procedures, and they were utilizing it's a battery charger for one of their forklift stations. So you can see that the procedure form, it shows the purpose of the procedure, which is to protect employees from injury when performing servicing or maintenance activities occurs. One of the most important aspects that need to be on the procedure is the voltage for the energy source. So as you can see here, the electrical voltage was 220 volts. I'm going to put that up here. The procedure also needs to have specific instructions for how authorized employees are to be locking and tagging out the equipment. So to make sure that it's especially easy to follow, we like to add these pictures in. So you're not leaving anything up to the imagination. As you can see here, the lockout tagout instructions, step 1 is to notify all affected employees that a lockout tagout procedure It's going to be completed and then stay clear of the area, right? And then you can see this A picture says shut down the charger using the red manual stop button or adjacent control panel shown. Ensure 0 amps. So you'll press the red button and then it will show that there's 0 amps, and that's when you know. Let's go back one. And then step 2, shut down the equipment if it is not running. And the picture B shows that they disconnected the charger using the red switchable lockable disconnect. So once you follow all those steps, then you can proceed with maintenance or repair work. And the great thing about this procedure form as well is that it also goes up the startup procedure as well. So these 6 procedures, these 6 steps you see here will help you and all the people around you. So the 6 steps of a lockout procedure, 1 includes, we're going to prepare for the shutdown, right? So do we need to bring in any special parts? Do we need to do any certain kinds of cleaning beforehand? You're really just preparing this scene essentially here. You want to know the type and the magnitude of the energy, the hazards of the energy. Is it electrical? Is it really hot? Is it cold that day? You know the methods and the means in which to control the energy. And step 2 is to follow the normal written lockout procedures of the equipment that are going to be on that form that you saw that are already put in place for you. Step 3 is to isolate the equipment from the energy disconnects. And that means the valves, the disconnect panel, and then start shutting them down. After everything is shut down, you're going to then apply the lockout tagout devices. We want to here notify affected employees that the lockout is being applied and that maintenance is being performed. We noted this earlier, but the devices, they have to be durable, remember? So you can't just use tape or cardboard or something to distinguish it. Your lockout device should distinguish you from another employee as well. So that affected employee, they need to know exactly, who is doing the work just by noticing the lock. And that could be, a picture of your name written on it or a picture of you possibly on it, something along those lines. And step 5 is to release the stored energy, like the spring, the hydraulic line. If there's anything in there that's holding up pressure, that pressure needs to be released and re-energized. So there are pieces of equipment like metal stamping plants that need to be metal blocks in place vertically that are an extra precaution or an extra measure of locking that stored energy out. And 6 is verify isolation. So then we want to hit the start button or something along those lines, the reactivation button, to make sure that the equipment is de-energized and that nothing at all happens. If the machine starts up, then we have a problem and something is still connected to an energy source. And I wanted to give you guys another little video to get a break and get another point of view about the 6 steps of a lockout tagout procedure.
While each system or piece of equipment is different, the steps of a lockout tagout procedure are the same. Preparation for shutdown. The authorized employee prepares for shutdown by gathering specific information about the machine or equipment. What is the type and magnitude of hazardous energy present in the system? What is the hazard of this energy, and how can the energy be controlled? In this example, the pump motor has electrical energy, and there is gravitational energy from the height of the stored fluid in the fermenting tank. Shutdown. The equipment must be shut down in accordance with procedure. Shutdown must be orderly and controlled to avoid creating any additional hazards to employees. Isolation. Once shutdown is complete, the equipment can be isolated. The authorized employee must operate the energy isolating devices to eliminate any hazardous energy sources. Application of devices. The authorized employee must inform any affected employees that lockout tagout devices are being applied to the equipment. The lockout devices must be applied in a manner that will hold the energy isolating devices in the safe or off position. Removal of stored energy. After the equipment is isolated and lockout tagout devices are applied, any residual stored energy in the system must be removed. Capacitors, batteries, coils, hydraulic accumulators, and fluid piping systems are all common sources of stored energy. In this example, the fluid in the piping, downstream of the isolation valve, contains stored energy. The technician can eliminate this stored energy by opening a downstream valve and draining the piping system. Verification of isolation. Before starting work, the authorized employee must verify that the hazardous energy is isolated. This is most commonly accomplished by attempting to start the equipment with the normal control switch. In some instances, verification of isolation may require electrical readings or more complex analysis. In this example, the employee verifies isolation by attempting to start the pump at the control switch and checking the system pressure gauge. Now that the 6 steps of lockout tagout are complete, work may commence. Release from lockout tagout. When work is complete, the equipment may be restored to its normal condition. The authorized employee should inspect the work area to ensure that non-essential items have been removed and the equipment components are intact. Employees should be safely positioned or removed during the release of lockout tagout. After lockout or tagout devices are cleared and before a machine or equipment is started, affected employees shall be notified of removal and re-energization.
Cool. So once you follow the 6 steps of lockout, tagout, the setting up the procedures, then we want to know what to do when we're restoring energy, right? So first step is to inspect the equipment to be sure that all of the tools, all of the parts that were used, they've been removed as needed. What you don't want to do is then add more opportunity for hazards to occur when your area is really cluttered and a lot of things are happening around there. So step 2 is then to replace guards and restore the machine controls. Step 3 is to notify the equipment owners and other employees in the area, really. Remove the locks and the tags, test the operation of the equipment, and then release the equipment back to the owners. Simple enough, and we're gonna keep that, the instructions for the restoration of energy on the energy control procedures as well, like I showed back on this slide, down at the bottom. All right, and now we're gonna go over that last part of the requirements that OSHA put in place for the lockout tagout program, and that is periodic inspections. So it's the final part of the lockout tagout standard that needs to be in place for your program, for Hollingsworth's program to be OSHA compliant, and it essentially needs to have an annual periodic inspection of each piece of equipment that could possibly need to be locked out or tagged out. So the standard mentions that the inspection must be carried out by an authorized employee, but the catch is that that employee cannot be a regular user of the procedure. So in this case, maybe the supervisor from another department would be the employee who we would need to perform the inspection on. And the purpose is basically to become familiarized with any inadequacies that may be found that have been overlooked, throughout the rest of the year. So an example you can see here is another MMA template of a periodic inspection certificate. So it must clearly here, it must identify the machine which the procedure was utilized. So what's the name of the machine, the names of the employees who are included in the inspection, and the persons who perform the inspection, of course. And as you can see on the form, it kind of leaves some space for some comments to be written down. And the inspector also has to have a talk or discussion with any authorized employees who are responsible for, working with that machine. and they have to discuss, what was found during the inspection, if there were any issues that came up, or maybe even get the perspective of the employees who are working more so with the machine a lot to see if they have any issues with the lockout tagout procedure. And the employees should then, once they're spoken to by the authorized employee, they need to be signing these forms, and a record of that inspection needs to be completed, obviously, and then kept for years. Like I mentioned, the inspector must speak with each authorized employee when lockout or tagout procedure is used. There should be a given or a response given to each recommendation after an inspection was completed. So just as if you are, inspected by OSHA and they find you with 4 different violations, that company then has to respond to how you corrected the 4 violations, right? So the same thing kind of goes for if you're doing these self audits of your lockout and tagout procedures. If there were 4 issues that were noticed by the authorized employee who was inspecting, all 4 of those recommendations need to be addressed and then fixed. And this is a short video I wanted to add in about how you can audit your facility's lockout and tagout program annually.
The final step to creating an effective lockout plan is to audit annually. This step involves conducting periodic inspections or audits to your lockout tagout program at least once a year in order to maximize its effectiveness and comply with OSHA regulations. The audit must be performed by an authorized inspector who fully understands the energy control procedure being audited, but who neither performs the lockout duties themselves nor actually uses the machine. During the audit process, the inspector must identify any deficiencies in or deviations to the lockout program made during the audit. These deficiencies and deviations must be corrected by the employee. Where lockout is used for energy control, the audit will include a review session between the inspector and each authorized employee, explaining the employee's responsibilities during the lockout process. When tagout is used, the review session will be expanded to include both authorized and affected employees, with each group having their responsibilities explained to them. At the conclusion of the audit, the employer must certify that the necessary inspections have been performed. Your lockout program is never completed. In fact, it should always be treated like a work in progress. Careful study and incremental improvements will allow you to keep your commitment to creating a safe workplace for all. For additional support with your lockout training program, or to request a free consultation with OSHA safety training professionals.
So like they mentioned in that video, it's your lockout tagout program. It's always going to be a work in progress. It's not just one thing that you have the energy control procedures. You're doing training maybe when it comes up. You have the lockout tagout program written and then was given to all the employees. It's not just a one and done. It's always changing. It's always going to be, you're always going to be making improvements on it. We're always going to be auditing it. So you can't just be stagnant with the performance of the lockout tagout program. Okay, so here's a couple, example pictures of equipment that was around some of the Hollingsworth facilities that they sent over to me. And these are all equipment that need to be locked out and tagged out if there's ever to be some maintenance or procedures being performed on it. I know there are definitely, forklift chargers, wrap stations, some balers and dock doors at almost all the facilities, maybe some welding machines at some. But the last thing we want to do to complete your training is to review the energy control procedures for each one of these pieces of equipment. And I know I don't have those energy control procedures with me, so I know on Reed and your safety team or the safety department's end, they're going to go over that now with you after this, this video is over. So in summary, we went over the lockout procedures and how they are used in our facility. Anytime an employee could be exposed to hazardous energy from a machine, should it start up unexpectedly, and that only facility assigned locks and tags are to be used. You can't just bring in a random lock off the streets to use it. That is not going to be allowed at Hollingsworth, as well as it is completely not OSHA compliant either. We always want to check the energy control procedures prior to performing a lockout and tagout, and never forget to check for stored energy. We want to communicate with all personnel who are affected by the job. We want to discuss the procedures with the affected employees. We want to train the affected employees just as much as we want to train the authorized employees. And lastly, each employee working on the job must have his or her own lock on each energy isolating device, and make sure that those locks each have one key affixed to them, and that they are, assigned to one specific employee, and you're not kind of switching and trading locks and tags, because it becomes very confusing. And as we learned from that first video I showed, communication is really, really important here. So having those locks specific to you is also a form of communication here. Kind of got a little wrap up video for you guys, and then we are done. So just take a watch.
This is Mike. Mike has a routine, a daily ritual. He also has a family that he loves. They live in a house in a quiet neighborhood at the edge of town. Every morning before he heads off to work, Mike says goodbye to his family, knowing that he'll see them again that evening. Mike has a good job. It pays the bills and helps provide for his family. During most days at work, Mike has to make a lot of decisions. Most of them are simple choices with minor consequences if he makes a mistake. But some of those decisions could be life-changing if he doesn't make the right choice. Today, he has a choice to make at the baler. It's clogged again. He thinks, should I just climb up and quickly unjam those boxes? Or should I call my supervisor to come lock out this machine? He makes the right choice and decides to get it locked out. It might save him a few minutes if he did it himself, but it's not worth the risk. He has his family to think of. Mike ends his day just like every other and drives home to his waiting family. They're completely unaware of the future that could have been. But what if he had made the other choice? He thinks, it's not a big deal. I unjammed it a couple of times before and nothing ever went wrong. I could waste 15 minutes waiting for someone to come and lock it out. What can really happen? What he doesn't know is that this kind of thinking has caused many injuries and deaths. And what his wife doesn't know is that she's about to get the worst phone call of her life. And Mike will never be coming home again. Every year, more than 50,000 people are injured in the US and Canada when not using lockout-tagout. Over 100 workers will die as a result of their injuries. Lockout-tagout is not a choice.
All right, so I really wanted to end with that video because I know you guys have balers in the facility, and it's really quite easy to put yourself into this situation in the video. I'm sure you all have your own family that you're hoping to come home to, and this is why you get into safety, is because it's so important. And it really, you might think that fixing the baler is the most important thing that you do all day, but really the most important thing you do all day is to get home to your family, to your loved ones. So just wanted to end on that video and think carefully about the next time one of these situations comes up, and think what's really important to you guys. And so that's really all I have for you all. So, this type of platform with the online training, it makes it hard to ask questions, but I wanted to leave you guys my contact information. So you guys have that on record, and feel free to reach out with any questions at any time if something comes up. Thanks.